Hi, this is Charlie with Boxing Focus, and a few thoughts on Chris Eubank Jr. and Billy Joe Saunders. So, I really rate Chris Eubank Jr. I've rated him more or less since the first time I watched him fight, which would have been sometime last year. I think the kid's got it in his space. I think he just does everything on a different level to most prospects. His movement, his his movement on his feet, his movement with his upper body, how elusive he is. He just looks $1 million. And I know he's been in against crap opposition, but even Billy Joe Saunders is a very good, solid fighter, very technically very good, but he never looked $1 million against the kind of opposition that Eubank Jr. has. But of course, the proof is in the pudding. We won't be able to tell whether he really is special until he's actually been in a proper fight against a solid opponent. And this is what the fight with Billy Joe represents. So look in the... I've seen Billy Joe Saunders fight on more than one occasion. And it's like... I don't remember it, It did not make any impression on me at all. I can barely remember his style without having to refer to YouTube to look at the past fight. It's like that guy at the party and you can't remember his name. That's Billy Joe Saunders' style. It's just it's good, he's quite active, he's quite technical, but it's just nothing stand out. And I think that's going to be his undoing, especially because he quite often seems to fight with an open guard. His hands either quite far apart or quite low and loose. And whilst that's okay against guys who aren't as talented as him, who aren't technically on his level, when he's in with somebody that is better than him, he's going to struggle. I think Eubank Jr.'s best punch so far has probably been his uppercut, and that seems to be, if you just look at Billy Joe's style, probably the thing that he's most open to. Just he hasn't been with anybody that's thrown it properly yet. So we'll see. If Eubank Jr., who covers, he covers ground with quite a lot of pace, and he sneaks these big, powerful uppercuts in. If he starts landing those on Billy Joe, the fight's going to be over relatively quickly. I don't see what it is that Billy Joe Saunders is going to do other than outwork Eubank Jr. in order to win this fight. He can hit hard, but he generally doesn't. And when he does hit hard, it tends to be these kind of big, wound-up shots that a fighter the calibre of Eubank Jr., or at least a fighter I think to be the calibre of Eubank Jr., will just see coming. And Eubank Jr. is hard to hit. This guy moves a lot. He doesn't stand there in front of his pardon me. He doesn't stand there in front of his opponents like a lot of Billy Joe Saunders' opponents have. Even though Billy Joe has fought the better class of fighter, but Billy Joe, it's not like he's been in with the elite world class fighters. There's still domestic level / I think it's tough to argue they're even really European championship level fighters that Billy Joe's beaten. So in terms of who's been in with the better opposition, who's the more accomplished as a pro, obviously Billy Joe, but the gap isn't as big as a lot of people are making it out to be. And the thing about Eubank Jr. is he's not really lost a single second of any fight that he's been in with. He's won rounds basically without throwing punches because he's just stood there and made guys miss. This kid has spent his entire pro career, 18 fights, just doing what he wants. He's not been hit properly, he's not been pushed, he's not been in any danger, he's just not... Nobody's even come close to making him sweat. And if you contrast that to how Billy Joe came through the pro ranks, Billy Joe, whilst he's done very well and been very good and won all his fights, he's still had spots of trouble. He's still had fights where he's been he's had a bad day at the office, I think they like to call it. So technically, I think Eubank Jr. is the better fighter in this fight. Obviously, Billy Joe has the experience. But the thing that I would find worrying as a Billy Joe fan is the way that, I mean, I'm not a Billy Joe Saunders fan, but I'm sure some fight fans are. He just doesn't seem to be able to keep his composure in the build-up. I've yet to see one interaction where he's kept a lid on it. I mean, he just sits there running his mouth off. You know, there's a radio show, Talk Sport, where Billy Joe throws a 100-gram bet at Eubank Jr. and every time Eubank Jr. speaks, he doesn't get more than 2 or 3 words into a sentence before Billy Joe Saunders is jumping on him, attempting to rile him. It's incredibly annoying to listen to, and just smacks of somebody who's desperate to rile his opponent. I think he knows that he needs to get Eubank Jr. off of his game in order to stand his the best chance of pulling out a good win here, and it. I think Eubank Senior's been quite clever in the build-up and basically saying, you know what, we're not interested. He's winding up Frank Warren, which I find hilarious. And thus, you look at Eubank Jr. He's just very, very calm. He just doesn't, he's completely unruffled. You know, the press conference they gave where Billy Joe was on Skype. You know, it looked like Eubank Jr. was the champion, and I stole that line from Bay Laurie. I can't pronounce the name, but another boxing analyst on YouTube. He's done a lot more than me, but anyway, yeah, he was saying that, and I thought that was a really good point. Eubank Jr. just sat there, just knows what he's got to do. He's very confident in himself. He doesn't need to act like a buffoon. He doesn't need to get under Billy Joe Saunders' skin. He feels he's got it in the bag anyway. Billy Joe Saunders is behaving like a challenger who thinks that he's the underdog in the fight. He's really, really trying to do something to change the dynamic between them, and it's not working. So yeah, I would find that worrying. And not just that, he's putting all this stupid pressure on himself. He's saying he's going to retire. I mean, it's just obnoxious. He's not going to retire if he loses. This 100-gram bet, I mean, is he really that wealthy? I don't know, maybe he is. I mean, he's just setting himself up for a big fall, and I think Eubank Jr. is going to not expose Billy Joe. I think it'll be a good competitive fight, but certainly going to make him eat his words. I fancy Eubank Jr. to stop Billy Joe. I really do, and not because Billy Joe Saunders isn't capable of giving Eubank Jr. a run for his money, but I just think he's just getting too desperate to win the fight, and thus he's going to be in the fight acting a little bit reckless, and if he starts coming undone, will he be able to keep it together? I just don't think he will. So this is Charlie with Boxing Focus. I think we're going to see another spectacular Chris Eubank Jr. show. Later rounds, knockout, that's my prediction. I'm going to put a little bit of money on this one, so we'll see. We shall see. I suspect it's one of those bets that's going to come off. Not that they always do, but I think this one will. So this is Charlie with Boxing Focus. Let me know what you think.